Sheep May Safely Graze is a soprano aria by Johann Sebastian Bach, setting words by Salomon Frank. The piece was written in 1713. The cantatas title translates "The lively hunt is all my heart's desire," and it is also known as the hunting cantata. The piece's English title is well known enough for it to evoke a pastoral scene. It has been referenced in discussions of how European culture depicts domestic animals and sheep in particular. Words are given to mythological characters, in this case Pales, a deity of shepherds, flocks, and livestock. Pales compares the peaceful life of sheep under a watchful shepherd to the inhabitants of a state with a wise ruler.
Bless the land with joy made bright.
All right, I'm just gonna get started. This will be a slow start, and obviously you can watch anything on the video afterwards if you need to. I'm Peter, aka Panda QC, and this is gonna be a workshop about how to make music events on Mozilla Hubs. First of all, I just want to give a quick intro to what Hubs is and what I'm going to cover here. So Mozilla Hubs is a web-based tool for making virtual reality environments. You can walk around in them in first person. You can meet with other people and voice chat. And you can drop in images and 3D models and other kinds of assets from the web, and using all of those features, you can use it to throw music events. Let's see. It's not as functional as a game engine, so if you want to do some really complicated interactivity with keeping score or changing the environment as you walk through it, that's going to be tricky. It's also not really a live coding platform, so if anyone wanted to try to change the landscape with the music while people are walking on it, that's going to be a tricky thing to do in Hubs. It's not really a streaming platform on its own, but I am going to show a couple workarounds for how you can stream stuff into it without even using another platform. So yeah, this is intended just for people who, I'm assuming most people here are musicians or artists who have some basic familiarity with computers and how to make things with them, but don't have any familiarity with Hubs. So I just kind of want to take you from zero to getting started with making things with this platform. So to get started, I just want to cover like the 10-minute version of using Mozilla Hubs. Like, imagine that you have a show very soon. You don't have time to make your own thing for it. You just want to meet with people somewhere virtually and stream some audio or video into there. So if we look at the Hubs front page, this is a very easy start. I'm already signed in, as you can see in the upper right, but that is also a painless process. You just enter your email and they send you a link, so you don't even really have to sign up for anything to use this. So let's take a look at what happens if we just click Create Room. And an important distinction of Hubs is that it has these things called rooms and scenes. So a scene is a 3D environment, much like you would have in any kind of game or virtual reality experience. But a room is a specific instance of that environment. So the same scene could be used in more than one room, and you could be meeting with people privately in one copy of a scene in a room, while other people elsewhere are using a different copy of the scene, and there won't be any interaction. And in addition to privacy, that's also a useful thing because of just kind of bandwidth issues and CPU issues with doing this kind of virtual reality stuff. So Hubs recommends that you cap the number of people in your room at a particular number, just to keep performance good on everybody's different laptop or phone or whatever they're using to look at this. So if you were doing a big event, one thing you could do is have multiple copies of the same scene in different rooms. So anyway, as soon as this loads, I hope it loads, I'm going to show how to get started with finding a pre-existing scene and putting some media into there. This is a very long loading time today. What else can I? There we go. Okay. So the first thing you're going to see here is just options to enter the room. You can join it in your browser. You can join it on a virtual reality device, or you can spectate. And what that means is you're just watching what happens in here without appearing as your own avatar. And like I said, with the bandwidth limitations and CPU limitations, that's a way that you could have a music event with a large number of people and still allow other people to watch it from the outside, as opposed to having to make multiple copies or something. Before I use any of those options, I'm going to go to the bottom right here and click on, no, that's not what I'm going to click on, I'm sorry. You know what, I think I need to make this browser window a little bigger. There we go. Let me adjust this so you can see everything. So once your browser window is large enough, you will see this options thing at the bottom of the room entry screen. And I want to look through a few of these to start. You can name the room. You get these great randomly generated names to start with. You have a control for size. So the recommended size, like I said, is 25, but you can set this up to 50. If everyone going to your event is on a gaming computer, they'll be fine. If not, it will probably run slow for some people. Room access is it's pretty much the same thing as YouTube, where you have the difference between an unlisted video and a private video. So a shared link is like unlisted. Anyone with the link can join it. Invite only is like private, so people actually need a code that you send them to get into it. And you also have these room member permissions, which control what your guests can do when they're inside the room. So this is kind of like the fun extra features that maybe you would want or maybe you wouldn't want, depending on the aesthetics of your event. Like create drawings. You don't necessarily want people to be able to draw graffiti on everything in your event, but maybe you do. And for now, I'm just going to leave these all on because it's just going to be me in here, and I'm going to use some of them anyway. Another thing right at the top is change scene. So, like I said, if you aren't making your own scene, there are a bunch of public scenes you can choose from with this, and I'm just going to pick this conference room at random and enter the room. It's going to ask you to use your microphone, and you don't actually have to turn your microphone on, but you do have to give your browser permissions in order to use Hubs. So now this will also take a second to load. It's a good thing I'm able to stream faster than I'm able to load websites today. There we go. Okay. So, first thing you can do when you get into a room is you click and drag to look around, much like a first-person game. You can also use the WASD keys to walk around. You're going to notice that you can walk through some objects, and you cannot walk through other objects. That is something you can set up when you make your own scene, and this is a pretty simple one. So you can pretty much walk through anything except the walls here. And if there was anyone else here, I would see them as the avatar. Right now I can just look down and kind of see my own avatar. And what we want to mess with here to start with is this place option in the bottom of the bar, in the middle of the bar here. So this gives us options to drop different things into the room. You have this pen, so you can draw on objects if you want to, and you have a camera, so you can take pictures. You can drop in GIFs or 3D models from the internet. But what you want to use for streaming things is upload, and in addition to a file from your computer, this can go to any kind of media link on the internet. So it could go to a direct MP3 link of your event, or it could go to an MP4 of a video stream. And depending on what kind of event you're doing, there's going to be a lot of different ways to set that up. So I'm just going to use Twitch as a very easy example, because Hubs is set up to automatically grab the right link from Twitch. So, if I pick some random video on the front page, copy the link to that channel, and paste it in here, I will get this loading cube, which is going to turn into a media frame, and that is going directly to the video streaming link from Twitch. Depending on the platform, that won't work as easily. With YouTube, I think people are using a YouTube downloader program to grab the correct direct like URL to a YouTube stream. And if it's hosted on your own server, then obviously that's going to be easier because you have the link yourself. So that is all it takes to use a pre-existing room and drop in a stream from somewhere else. And you can hold down Shift to get a context menu for this and delete it. The other thing I want to cover, just working with pre-existing content here, is the voice chat does not have to be your voice. So for any of you who are familiar with music streaming events, you've probably used some kind of program like Jack or Virtual Audio Cable or Black Hole to route the audio from your music software into your streaming software. And you can do the same thing here if you go to the lower right and check out this Preferences menu. You can change your microphone source to one of those Virtual Audio Cable programs. So if I change this to Black Hole and give the browser permissions, now my avatar is going to be making whatever sound or music I play through Black Hole from another program. So just with those two things, you could with like 5 minutes set up streaming in a room without doing anything really creative or intensive. But that's boring. So now let's jump into how to actually make your own things with this. I'm going to leave the room and get back to the Hubs homepage, and I'm also going to reopen the YouTube channel for this because I was worried about bandwidth for a second there, and double check that nobody has any questions so far. And yeah, there will be a Q&A at the end of this, by the way. So, you're on the Hubs homepage. What you want to go to develop your own things is Spoke. And this is the name for the editor. And very simple, you can just click Get Started, and you're going to get a list of projects. If you've never made anything before, this will obviously be blank. So let's go straight to New Project. And this, as well as creating a room, this gives you a list of pre-existing scenes. So these are scenes that other people have made, and they've chosen to let you use them to build your own and kind of reverse engineer them. So if you make something with this, it's not necessarily going to be available here unless you choose that option yourself. So if you click New Empty Project, just going to load a very simple default scene here. And for anyone familiar with game engines, this interface is going to look pretty familiar, but if you're not, you're in luck, because this is like the easiest, simplest possible version of a game engine. So first of all, I'm just going to go over what the parts of that are, and then jump into some things you can use for audio and video and just making the environment interesting. So on the top left here, you have this window that shows you what is in your scene. If you click and hold, you can spin around with the view. If you scroll, you can zoom in and out. And if you right click, you can look around in first person and also use those same WASD keys to walk around. But this is not going to reflect things you can bump into or where the ground is in the same way that the finished room will. So I can just go through the ground here, and that's probably not going to be something you do in a finished scene, but this is useful for just navigating a complicated scene and figuring out where all your stuff is. On the top right, you have this list called the hierarchy, which is just the name of everything that you've put into your scene so far. It's called a hierarchy because you can group things together. So as you can see, everything is right now inside Crater, which is just the name of the whole scene. But I could also make a group and put a couple of these things together, and then it would be easier to move them around. And once you get complicated, you're probably not going to have everything as a singular object. So it's great to be able to group things like that. Another useful thing you can do with the hierarchy is click on an object and then press F. and that will center it in the view. So no matter where I am, what I'm looking at, if I select this object and press F, my view will jump back to that. And that's another easy way to navigate around your scene once it gets complicated. As you can also see, once I selected that, in the lower right here, I have properties. And this is just everything you can edit about this particular object in your scene. So position, rotation, and scale are pretty obvious things. You also have both visible and enable. And for different types of objects, those are going to mean different things. So for your music and your video objects, that's going to mean, do you want people to have controls for it, or do you just want to hear it? And enable, on the other hand, for music is just going to be, do you want it to be there at all? And I'll get into that in more detail soon. On the lower left here, this is everything you can put into your scene. So you kind of have two ways to look at it. First of all, with elements, these are just kind of the archetypes of anything you can put into your scene. So if you use this to drop in an image or a video or an audio, that will be blank at first until you put some link and content into it. And in addition to that, if you scroll down to My Assets, this will be anything that you have imported into Hubs before. So this is all from the previous project I did with Hubs. I've got some GIFs and PNGs. I've got a ton of different audio files. And if I scroll down somewhere in here, there are probably going to be there's some 3D models too in GLB format. And anything in this asset browser, whether it's your own stuff or the elements, you can just click and drag to put into the scene. And it will not always be clear where it's going to appear, or if it's going to appear correctly. There we go. It's kind of dependent on perspective, so there are times that you're going to want to just fix the position by, using the properties thing or moving it around. And below your own assets here, you have a bunch of just prefab things. So you have this architecture kit, which is, as far as I can tell, it's just different types of squares. But you can make a house with it or something. You have a rock kit, which has different rocks you can drop in. Sketchfab, I'm not sure if this will still work, because there was some talk on the Hubs Discord about Sketchfab no longer being integrated. So use that with caution or test it out. You have images and videos from Bing. You have preset sounds. You have the same GIFs that you would get on Discord or whatever app you're using to send people GIFs. So yeah, putting anything into the scene is just kind of a drag and drop process from this browser here. So once it's there, this doesn't make much sense. It's halfway through the ground. It's kind of huge. So let's take a look at the editing tools here, which are very simple. The one I have selected up in the top right now is Translate, and that just means move. So you have these arrows which are centered on the model. You can move it in different directions by dragging the arrows. Next to that we have Rotate, and you'll notice this is only going in 90-degree increments, which is probably not useful. But if you look up here in the middle of the bar, we have Snap Mode, so you can turn that off, and then you can freely rotate things or freely move things without snapping to any interval. And you can also choose different intervals to snap to. So I could choose different distances to move this model by, or different angles to rotate it by. And then if I go back to rotate, you can see it's kind of clicking at 10-degree angles. Another thing to pay attention to once you've rotated an object like that is this second little menu here called Transform Space. So this is going to let you choose, are you moving and rotating the object relative to itself or relative to the world? So visually what that means, these arrows let me move it relative to the world. And if I change it to selection, these arrows let me move it relative to the way it's rotated. So, you know, if I put this grass sideways and I want to move it up along its own vertical axis, I can do that. And then if I decide I also want to move it in the world relative to the ground, I can do it like that. The last thing up here, which may get in your way, may not, is grid visibility. You can just turn the grid off if you want to. And you know, that's pretty self-explanatory. You can change the height of it as well. And you know, you can make things that are on multiple levels, have really complicated terrain for people to walk around, so that could come in handy. So I'm gonna just jump back to the beginning here and delete almost everything and get started showing you some audio stuff now. So to redo what we just did in the example room, you know, if you want to embed something, you can drag video or audio right into the scene, and that is going to appear way out here in space as this audio icon. And the first control that's going to be relevant to you is URL. So same way as before, if you have a direct link to your event's MP3 stream or to a radio station MP3 stream, if you want to test it out, you can just paste that URL in there. Or if you already have audio assets that you've imported into your project, you could just take one of those and drag it into that URL, and now it's going to point to where Hubs has uploaded this in its own file system, and that'll go straight there and play it. Below that, a few essential controls. One is just called controls. So this is, you know, do you want users in your room to be able to change the audio, or do you want it to be invisible? Autoplay is pretty self-explanatory, and loop. You know, do you want it to play once? Do you want it to just play continuously? Where this gets interesting is override audio settings. So if you're just using Hubs as a voice chat system, everybody's going to be the same volume. There's not going to really be anything spatial to it. But that's not very interesting for building some kind of music event or some kind of dynamic sound environment that you want people to wander around in. So once you click override audio settings, you're going to get all these different options for the audio. The first one is type, which can be either stereo or Panda nodes. So stereo means that it's always going to be oriented left and right the same way that you recorded it, whereas Panda node means that it's going to be oriented in space and kind of depend on how people walk around for where left and right are. Distance model is how the sound falls off as you get closer and further away from it. So linear is the most intuitive, and I use that for mostly everything when I built a sound environment with this. It's exactly what it sounds like. As you get further away at an even rate, the sound is going to change at an even rate. And you know, exponential is an exponential function, so it will fall off quickly at first and then fall off slower as you get further away. So that might be useful if you know, you want something to be faintly in the background, but you don't want to really hear it very loudly unless you get close to it. And inverse is kind of the opposite of that. So if you want it to be loud for a while and then just suddenly drop off beyond a point. These roll-off factor, reference distance, and maximum distance control where you stop hearing the sound. So for linear, it's the most intuitive one, and maximum distance is where you'll stop hearing it. For inverse and exponential, I highly recommend just playing around with it and seeing how things work to get a sense of it. But as you can see, reference distance is kind of like a scale for how these distances are calculated. And yeah, just play with those three factors, and you'll figure out how to make sounds fall off in the way you want. But if you don't want to think about it too much, I recommend just going with linear, setting the maximum distance to what you want, and once you walk to that maximum distance, you won't hear anything anymore. Cone is a directional control for the sound. So at 360, you're going to hear the sound no matter what side of it you're on. And if you set this to a value less than 360, for example 90 degrees, then I'm only going to hear the sound very well when I'm right in front of it. Cone outer angle is a fall off control for that, so it's less sharp. So if I set this to 180 on the outer angle and 90 on the inner angle, then I'm going to hear this loudly right in front, and I'm going to still kind of hear it as I get to the sides, and then once I get behind it, it's going to fall off. So this won't be useful for every project. You know, if you want to do an outdoor scene that just kind of feels like nature sounds coming from different places, and you walk around and hear them wherever they are located, you probably don't need to use the cone very much. On the other hand, if you want to simulate like a house with multiple rooms, or a sound system that's pointing in one direction, this could be a fun thing to mess with. And the third cone parameter is outer gain. So, you know, if I set that to 0.25 and the actual volume of the sound is 0.5, then I'm going to hear it at full volume in front, it's going to fall off to the sides, and then it'll be half of that full volume when I'm behind the sound. You might be wondering why this is called override audio settings. So you can also find global audio settings if you click on your scene name at the top of the hierarchy. And here, this also works exactly the same way. So by default, it's doing the equal volume thing everywhere. If you click override audio settings, you have all these same controls for distance and cone and stuff like that, except that these controls affect people's avatars. Well, actually, sorry, half of them affect people's avatars, and half of them affect media that's placed into the scene. So, you know, this lets you control how loud your guests are, basically. If you want them to be really loud, you could keep these default settings and let them fall off at a distance of 10,000 meters. If you want them to be really quiet, you could set that to 5 meters, and then, you know, people would actually have to be close to each other to hear each other voice chat. Media volume is the same thing, so if you want to have the same volume settings for any kind of streaming, any kind of audio that you drop into your scene, you can control that here. Usually, in my experience so far, I've just set the settings individually for each audio source, but if you're getting into managing, you know, a complicated event with lots of people, this could be a fun thing to mess with. And another thing on that note is this new feature called an audio zone. So this is just an imaginary box. I'm sorry, I never covered the scale control, but there's also a scale control up at the top here. So I can make this box big or small. That's how scale works. More importantly, this scale is a separate area with separate audio settings for whatever is inside it. So it could be tricky to think of use cases for that, and I haven't used it for many things so far. I think one good application could be, you know, let's say you're using that trick I showed before where you have voice chat as a way for people to stream audio in. Maybe you want to have a stage area where the avatars are really loud, and an audience area where the voice chat doesn't get so loud and interfere with the music that you're streaming in. So this audio zone would be a way to set that up. You know, you could do it really crudely and have everything inside the zone be zero volume, or if you want to get into these distance controls, you know, you could set it so that people on the stage fall off at a larger distance and people in the audience fall off at a closer distance. Whatever you want, you can do it inside this audio zone. And yeah, same thing, basically same dynamic for video. That's interesting. By default, the video is showing me a picture of the spoke editor. Yeah, you can drop a URL into here as well. It could be a streaming thing. I think it could even be something from your Dropbox, or just a direct link somewhere. You can choose whether it has controls, whether auto plays or loops. So getting any kind of media into here is pretty much the same deal. I just want to pause for a second here if anyone has any questions about the audio and media side of this, and if not, I want to get more into just how to build out the scene and make it a little bit more interesting and lively rather than these objects floating in space. All right. So for now, I'm going to delete all this stuff. Let's just look at how you actually make this into an interesting place for people to walk around and listen to music. So the first thing you want to have in your scene is called the spawn point. And this is just where anyone is going to start when they enter the room. And you probably want them to be standing on something rather than floating in space. So let's just drop a rock into here. Actually, let me check this question. How do you mean in reply to routing video and audio into a separate object? Do you mean like splitting them so the stream would go to different places, or? Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm not sure you can separate the video and audio from a video that way. It might make the most sense to have them streaming from different sources, or you could take you could drop it in twice and have different audio controls for the video and for the audio. But I believe also when you drop in a video, you'll get those same audio settings as with audio. So, you could control the source from where the video appears in that way. But yeah, that's a good question, and that is kind of a limitation. So if you wanted like your speakers to be in a different location from your video, probably the easiest thing to do would be stream them separately. Okay, I'm going to zoom out a bit and look at this rock. And I want to put this underneath my spawn point so that people can be standing on this rock when they come in. That is huge. Let's scale this down. Alright, so now we have some basic terrain. My person is going to appear right on top of this rock. And just for example's sake, let's copy and paste the rock. That's Control C, Control V, same as many other programs. And now we have a very complicated landscape. And you would hope that they can walk from here to here and go back and forth. One thing you're going to run into with any program like this is that walking across uneven surfaces is not as intuitive as it seems. So there are several ways to visualize that and control that. Any scene you make is going to have a floor plan in the hierarchy. And this is not something you have to mess with, but you can. So this is going to happen automatically anytime you export a scene. But if you click regenerate, you get a visual representation with this red grid, and that shows every surface that people can walk on. And if you look in the properties for the floor plan, you have things that control how tall the people are, how wide they are, how high they can step, and how high of an angle they can step at. So if you're running into problems where you have a complicated environment and people are just getting stuck, this is what you want to look at. And let's say that, you know, imagine people are just getting stuck in the middle here. One way you could get around that very simply is just put a box in the middle and make it invisible and let people walk on that instead. So this is going to take a moment to load, but let's say, you know, I have these rocks which are kind of complicated to walk on, but really I just want people to walk on a flat plane because that's simpler and their avatars don't get stuck or anything. So you could do something like that. Go to properties for this object, make sure it's walkable, which just means that it's included in that floor plan when it gets generated, and then turn off visible. So now if I go generate the floor plan a second time, you know, that wasn't very effective. So I should move this up a little bit to demonstrate. Yeah, so now I have this box intersecting with these rocks, and people can just walk on top of that, and it simplifies the terrain. So when I did a project with Hubs, it was just kind of a bunch of rocks and hills and stuff you could climb over, so there were definitely cases where I just had a bunch of boxes like that, and you're actually walking on the boxes rather than walking on something more complicated. And I forgot to mention this before, but for any object that you drop in, you have these two controls, collidable and walkable. And that's going to control, can people walk through it and can they walk on top of it? So if you want people to go through things, you would just turn both of those off. You know, there could be cases where you want people to walk through something transparent, and maybe you would turn collidable off for that case. So aside from dropping your own media in, there are other ways to add some life to the environment. And the thing you want to be careful with all of this is both bandwidth and CPU. So there is a 128 megabyte limit for not for stuff you stream into Hubs, but for things that are actually in your scene. So, you know, if you're dropping a lot of images and videos into here, you might want to be careful about the total file size of that. Not only because of the limit, but also just because of loading time for people. These can be kind of slow things to load on a lot of internet connections. And within Hubs, with its own preset objects, what you're going to be more concerned about is does it run smoothly as far as, you know, the user's CPU. So like one example of that is lighting. By default, there's this directional light which works like a sun. So as you can see, you know, we have light on one side of these rocks and shadow on the other side. And if I delete that light from the hierarchy list, we just have total darkness. And then you've got a few other lighting options. So ambient light is just kind of like your background light for like, it's non-directional. So if you already have your lighting on your 3D models, which is something you can do, you might want to just use an ambient light and then just illuminate the textures on your models exactly as they appear. You can also have a hemisphere light and a spotlight and a point light. So these are going to work more like a specific point. That one is inside the ground, I believe. So let's turn up the range a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of like a, oops. point light is more like a light bulb type of thing, and this can be really cool as an effect, but again, it's something you want to test out for performance rather than doing too much of it. So if you're really into the environment building and the 3D modeling side of this, one thing I would recommend that you can do with Blender or whatever 3D modeling program you use is called baking lighting, and that's just making the lighting in advance and then saving it as part of the texture, so it doesn't have to be done in real time. And that's a process you can look up what to do. I don't really want to make this a Blender tutorial, but it's a great way to reduce how intense your scene is to run. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to drop back in an ambient light, set it to like 2.5, and now things are just kind of lit evenly from everywhere. Another fun thing to mess with is water. This looks really cool. It gives you a lot of controls for how big the waves are, how fast they're moving, anything like that. But on the flip side, I've found this is one of those things that slows down browser performance a lot. So I would say use water sparingly if you really have to in a scene that's not too complicated. And what I've found is kind of the lower cost way to do environmental effects in hubs is particles. So let me just move this closer to my person here, if I can. It's way out there, huh? Okay. It's underground. There we go. So this is just a bunch of squares coming out from a bigger square in a semi-random way. It doesn't look very cool at first. You can see if I make the bigger square bigger, then these squares are more spread out. It's still pretty boring, but you can do a few cool things with it. So first of all, the way this is being controlled is these are obviously distributed semi-randomly, but they disappear after a particular amount of time. So if you look at these controls for age randomness, lifetime, and lifetime randomness, those will control how long they exist before they disappear. So there's no distance control, there's just time. Another thing you can do is set them to start and end at a different size. So maybe I want them to start really big and get smaller as they go on. And that's kind of hard to see. So I could also mess with these controls for how opaque they are when they start and end. So maybe they fade in and fade out, and then you have this little drifting cloud that's kind of going to get smaller as it disappears. You also have velocity, which is what direction and speed they're moving in when they start and when they die. So let's just try making the start velocity a bigger number, and the end velocity 0. And then, you know, maybe this is starting to feel like a smoke machine effect, where it's coming out quickly from a vent somewhere and then slowing down as it gets out over the floor. And to really top that off and actually make it interesting, you can use PNGs or GIFs instead of just this white square. So I did this a lot last time I was working with hubs, and I have a bunch of different like cloud images that I was using for this. So it's the same thing with other assets. You can just drag from the browser into the image URL in the properties for this. And now I have a bunch of little smoke puffs that are drifting out from here. I don't like the way that looks at all, I'm sorry. Let's make them bigger, and make them end also a little bit bigger. Yeah, so now I've got a really foggy scene, and the nice thing about it is not necessarily the fog itself, but that I could do a ton of this and it would still work pretty well in my browser. So you could use this really creatively to kind of have like fake dynamic lighting effects, lots of different environmental effects. You know, if you like set this to go upwards at first and downwards afterwards, maybe you'll get kind of a waterfall or fire hydrant type of effect or something. So yeah, not to be stuck on that element too much, but that's a fun way to get creative with the environment here. Another really good thing to cover before I end this is links. So let's drop a link in here. This is just going to appear to people as an icon in the scene, but you could also drop in an image. Where is an image? There it is. And in the image properties, you can also use that as a link. For the purposes of this, I'm going to ignore the image and just use the link. So what can this do? It can do two interesting things here. First of all, you can link to a different room in Hubs or an external website. So this could be a great way to maybe, you know, set up your merge table or have multiple rooms for a virtual rave, or, you know, point it anywhere on the internet that you want to. Maybe it could be an escape link for people with bad computers who just want to go to the YouTube stream instead. But another thing it can do is move you around inside the scene. So we've got this spawn point that we start with, but if you look through the elements that Hubs comes with here, there's also a waypoint. So if I drop that in, now I've got another little virtual person over here. And if for some reason I wanted to be able to walk up to this link icon and click it and then be here, that's really easy to set up. So the way you do it is just give it a name. I'm just going to call it test, and go to the link. And for the URL, if you're familiar with basic HTML, this works the same way as jumping to different points inside a web page. So instead of a full like HTTP address, all you need is hashtag and then the name of the location. So if I make that link go to hashtag test, it's now a link from this point in space to this point in space. And you know, obviously there's lots of architectural possibilities for that. You could even get really crazy and, you know, have multiple copies of your scene that have different environmental characteristics and let people, you know, skip between like a day and a night version or something crazy like that. Yeah, so I recommend messing with that if you want to get creative with the environment. One more thing for people who are really into 3D modeling and animation is an experimental feature in here. So to see it, you have to go to this top left menu, go to developer and enable experimental features. And then if you look down through your elements, you have one more thing called a trigger volume, which looks like it's from Portal or something. This is another beautiful imaginary box that does stuff when you're inside it. And what this does is, so far, it just starts and stops animations of 3D models. So I honestly don't have a good example of this to show you right now, but you can select any object in here, and if I've selected one of the rocks for the landscape here, if that rock actually had a animation associated with it, I could make that animation start when people walk inside this space and then stop when they walk outside of that. So, you know, you could get creative with that, and I'm not even sure what I would do with that. You know, maybe you want to have a virtual bouncer who frisks people when they walk inside the door. That seems like something you wouldn't want at a virtual rave, but anything you could import as an animation into Hubs, you could trigger to start and stop with this. And so yeah, that's some stuff you can do with the environment. I want to look through my notes and make sure I haven't missed anything here. yeah, I guess the one thing I'm missing here is how do you use this when you're done. So this is one of the easiest publishing processes possible. You go to this top left menu again. I'm going to save it first of all as this video, and now publish to Hubs. A couple options here to pay attention to. One is allow remixing. So if you remember when we first opened up this editor, you could use other people's pre-existing scenes to make your own. So if you check that box, your scene is going to be searchable in that list. And allow Mozilla to promote is what it sounds like. You know, in addition to being in that list, they can also put it on their front page or whatever. So let's click Save and Publish. And we're going to get this performance check warning thing. And, you know, this is, to use the famous quote, this is more like guidelines than rules, but it is going to have an effect on people who are using your scene. So if you're getting warnings for all of these things, you probably want to look into what you're doing in your scene and find ways to simplify it. For example, you know, I basically have a flat plane for people to walk on, and that has a ton of triangles in it for geometry. So maybe I would want to go back into my 3D modeling program and simplify those rocks, and then I would be able to have something that runs better in people's cell phones. Materials are the same thing. This can include both the textures of 3D models and also images that you import. Or sorry, those are separate things, materials and textures. But you know, as you can see, this is great because they already have warnings and recommendations and links for you to learn more about what's going to run well. So in addition to testing it yourself, you can get a little recommendation here as you export it. So now let's go ahead and click Publish Scene. It's going to upload everything I've put into here into the Hubs server. And I can view it. And we're pretty much back to the beginning step now. I can create a room with it, or I can edit it again. And one thing that took me forever to realize is you don't have to publish every time. If you make a scene in Spoke and change it and just save it again, then any room that you've published with that scene will already reflect those changes. So, you know, the room scene distinction is a little bit tricky to figure out at first, but it's good to know. So let's create a room with this scene, just to show it off. And now I'm here at the spawn point. The one thing I can do here is walk around. I can click on that link, and now I'm on the other side. So this is not the most exciting place to have a rave, but it took very little time to make, very little skill to make, and most importantly, I just had to use whatever objects I wanted to bring to it. So, you know, you could get into 3D modeling, you could get into music, you could get into video, or you could just get into whatever little subset of things you're really interested in and drop it into here, and it's just a really easy way to put it all together. So yeah, I think that covers all the basics of getting started with this. And at this point, I just want to reappear as a person here, and yeah, does anyone have any questions or things you want to cover in more detail here? And if not, let me recommend again, there is this supplementary material link in the video description. So that is, you know what, I'm just gonna drop that into the stream and actually show it. This is just here to save you the time of trying to find and copy down any links to anything that I mentioned in the presentation. So you've got direct links to Hubs and the editor. The Discord is really useful. I have some information on streaming sources, on programs you can use to make your own elements for this. And I also have some recommendations for other things you can use if you've watched this whole video and realized that you don't want to use Hubs at all. Let's see. Yeah, to answer this question, there is a way to restrict a number of attendees. That's actually automatic when you create a room. So if you remember at the beginning, I'm just going to exit this and go back to the Hubs front page. When you create a room, you have a control right there for how many people can join the room, and that's in this first option where you're creating a room. That's under options and room size. So by default that's 24 people. You can set it up to 50, but once it gets up to that size, people are just going to be in the spectate mode and they're going to be left in the lobby. And another thing I recommended, I think I touched on this earlier, but you could use your scene in more than one room. So you could have exactly the same streaming setup, the same environment or whatever, and just have multiple copies of that. So when the first one gets up to 24 people, you could post another link and they could be in like room 2 or something. But yeah, that's in the settings to create a room. And if I jump back a second to the one I just made, you can also get to that from within the room, I believe. Yeah, let's double check that. So that's also in one of these setting menus. Or you know what, you might have to go back to the beginning menu where you create the room to do that. Yeah. Yeah, but that's a control you have when you set it up. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I'll hang out in the chat for a little bit longer anyway. But I hope this has been informative to everybody. This is. Like I said at the beginning, this is just like one of the easiest creation tools for this kind of thing ever. So you don't have to be like a live coding person. You don't have to be a game developer. You just kind of have to know how a computer works and how 3D space works, and you can just kind of drop things in and get going and focus on the creative side of it. Obviously that comes with limitations, like you know, all these things I mentioned dealing with bandwidth and with processor speed. You know, those could be way more optimized if you were a programmer or a game developer and you really dove into it. But you know, if you want a fun way to just create some kind of different zone for an underground event, this is a great option. And once again, do check that links document in here if you need any extra ideas on how to work with this. So yeah, thank you again to everybody who attended, and yeah, invite me to your events.